Hello world and welcome. Nope. Boom. Hello world, my name is Anson. Welcome to another edition of the Ghouls and Gains vlog. For the past couple of episodes, we've been talking about how to prepare yourself for the outbreak, and we're going to continue that conversation with one of my favorite topics, and that's the weapons you may need for the initial wave of the outbreak. So stay tuned. About in the first episode how to defend your home and how to make sure that your windows and your doors are reinforced, how to have a fence. One thing I might add to that to kind of help with the subject of a weapon is potentially add spikes to your fence so that's even more difficult for the zombies to get past your defenses, and that would definitely help limit the amount that you have to do any kind of hand-to-hand combat. Alright, with that being said, I have 4 things for you to consider when you're choosing the right weaponry and that first line of defense for the outbreak. Number 1, it's very quick to assume that you're just going to grab the nearest gun, a nearest firearm, and just lay waste to some zombies and just shotgun it up. With any kind of modern video game talking about an outbreak, that is the first thing you do, is you go grab the nearest submachine gun, hell, full-on machine gun, shotgun, laser guns. You go for the biggest and baddest weapon. Well, in the practical sense, that is something you're not going to want to necessarily do when an actual outbreak occurs. Because think about it this way. When you use a firearm, that is going to draw attention to yourself. And what is one thing that we've talked about since episode 1? You want to make sure that you are being as discreet and low-key as possible. So using a firearm is going to be counterintuitive to doing that. So really and truly, a firearm should be the last wave of defense for you. It should almost be an emergency situation to use a firearm. And when picking that firearm, you want to make sure that it's something that you can handle. You want to make sure that when you're firing it, you're not going to sit there and just start and just shooting up in the air. Pray and spray does not work in the zombie outbreak. I'm just saying. So if you're an expert Call of Duty player like myself and you just sit there and pray and spray all day, you're gonna die. Just a little forewarning. Go ahead and make your own casket, because it's not gonna work out for you. So things to remember with a firearm: 1, it's gonna be a last line of defense. 2, you want to make sure that you can handle it. And 3, you want to make sure that you find a good suppressor to put along with it so that you can stay as discreet as possible. So number 2. So if I don't recommend to start off with a firearm, what do I recommend? What I do advise is working with those same rules that we have with the guns, is something that is discreet, that is easy to handle, and even more on top of that, something that you can master in a short period of time. So one good weapon is potentially a machete, maybe a long blade machete, or a katana. Why is a katana a good weapon for the outbreak? You don't have to worry about when you retract that weapon that it may get caught on flesh, because that katana blade is nice and smooth. Now, obviously, my other favorite is a long-bladed machete. Now, you can get many machetes out there. You can get ones that have hooks on the end, but you definitely still want to look for ones that are a little bit more of a long blade, because you still want that distance. And so both of those are really good weapons to consider as far as starting that hand-to-hand combat. We hope that we never have to get in that predicament, but if your defenses do fail, you want to make sure that you are ready and equipped to go into a hand-to-hand combat mode. So number 3, we talked about guns are potentially a last resort weapon. We talked about katanas and machetes being a good primary weapon, but what about some of your secondary weaponry? And so for that, it kind of is simple. You want to make sure that you have a good amount of knives on you, so that, let's say you do have your katana or you do have your machete and they do get stuck in the flesh of a zombie. You don't want to have to sit there and just keep on having to pull and potentially have a zombie come up behind you and feast on your flesh. You want kind of a backup system. And so, having as many knives as you can to potentially keep on stabbing away is really going to help out. So not only do you want that good primary weapon, which is potentially a katana or a machete, but you also want good secondary weapons, which is potentially a longer blade knife, any type of survival knife that you pick up from a camping store or an outdoors store. And that's going to lead me to my fourth point, which is weaponry that you can also use for utility purposes. So a good thing to look into is, again, maybe some outdoor knives, potentially a hatchet that you can use to cut wood for fires and things like that. So you want to consider some of those weapons that you could also use in a utility purpose. Now that being said, so we've talked about some of the things that you want to consider when you're choosing the right weapon. Let's talk about some of the things that you don't want to do when you're choosing the right weapon. You don't want to rely on weaponry that takes a long time to master. I've seen some people talk about picking up a bow and arrow because they can keep their distance, and it's a low profile. But the problem with that is you kind of have to be good at archery to hit certain targets, to hit them effectively. And so a bow and arrow may not be the best idea. Now a crossbow, potentially. The reason I would say a crossbow over just a simple bow and arrow, it does hold like a gun and it does keep a low profile. So it's a little bit more stable, a little bit easier to aim. And so if you do want to go with the archery route, you want to keep that distance, keep that low profile, then you want to make sure that you potentially look at something like a crossbow, not a Walking Dead plug. Love you, Daryl, my boy. I hope these tips were helpful for you. Remember the key points of just subtlety. Remember that you want to have something that is easy for you to wield and easy for you to use. Don't be a danger to yourself. If you found these points helpful, go ahead and share these videos on social media, share them on YouTube. Check us out at Ghouls and Gains. We'll post every episode of our vlog. Check us out on social media at Ghouls and Gains on both Instagram and Twitter. And as always, stay safe, and how will you train for the outbreak? So I have 4 things for you to consider when you're choosing the right. What the